Also this morning, the Prime Minister has reiterated his opposition to the Irish border backstop. In a letter to the European Council President, Boris Johnson said to Donald Tusk that the plan laid out in the withdrawal agreement is simply unviable and anti-democratic. The letter came after a phone call between Mr Johnson and the Taoiseach Leo Varadkar, who emphasised the importance of continued free trade on the island of Ireland. Sky's political correspondent Tom Rayner reports.
He's yet to hold face-to-face Brexit talks with EU leaders, but yesterday the Prime Minister claimed he thought they would ultimately agree to his terms for a Brexit deal.
Of course, our friends and partners on the other side of the Channel are showing a little bit of reluctance at the moment to change their position. That's fine, I'm confident that they will.
Last night he set out why he believes they should. In a letter to the President of the European Council, Boris Johnson provided fresh detail on his vision of what a revised Brexit deal could look like, restating his red lines but also suggesting possible next steps. He writes that the backstop cannot form part of an agreed withdrawal agreement because it binds Britain too closely to the EU and risks creating a border in the Irish Sea. In its place, he says he wants to see alternative arrangements with checks away from the border, but in an apparent concession acknowledges there will be a need for something that offers a degree of confidence about what would happen if these arrangements were not all fully in place at the end of that period. A response from Brussels is expected later and will no doubt set the tone for Mr Johnson's visits to Berlin and Paris in the next few days. But if his phone conversation with the Taoiseach Leo Varadkar yesterday is anything to go by, the EU is unlikely to change course. The Irish leader insistent that the backstop remains an important legal guarantee against a hard border that cannot be removed. In Westminster, opposition parties were dismissive of Downing Street's proposals. Responding to the letter, the Shadow Brexit Secretary Sir Keir Starmer said it was evidence the government had no negotiating strategy. He said it didn't specify what the alternative arrangements could be or what the alternative to the backstop could be. And the Liberal Democrats went further, suggesting the letter pointed to a no-deal exit.
This seems to me more like a parting shot from a Prime Minister who is now focused on delivering no deal and seeking to blame others, in this case the European Union, for that outcome.
Whether the EU will be quite as swift to reject the Prime Minister's letter is yet to be seen. But his requests are not wholly dissimilar to those made unsuccessfully by his predecessor. The difference, according to Mr Johnson, is that he is ready to walk away and Parliament will be unable to stop him. Tom Rayner, Sky News, Westminster.
Well, let's get more from our political correspondent Tamara Cohen here on Sunrise. She's in Westminster now, and it was interesting what Tom was saying there, Tamara. Is Boris Johnson actually trying to get a deal?
Well, Sarah Jane, the letter points out that time is short and the deadline is fast approaching. And what Boris Johnson is proposing in this letter, now here in black and white, we've heard him say it before, but here he's setting out his red lines to the EU, getting rid of the backstop and replacing it with something that they will have to come up with in the next 2 years, some kind of alternative. And the initial reaction we were getting here from EU sources last night is that they were going to be pretty unimpressed with the idea that the backstop that they spent 2 years negotiating, a legal guarantee, would be replaced with an unspecified alternative. And Boris Johnson says some kind of commitment that he would be flexible in negotiating in case it wasn't ready to go. These alternative arrangements weren't ready to go in 2 years' time. So we await the official response of the EU, which is expected later today. But certainly his conversation with the Irish Taoiseach seems to set the tone for what we expect later this week. Boris Johnson is going to Berlin tomorrow to meet with Angela Merkel, to Paris on Thursday to meet with Emmanuel Macron, and we expect he's going to get the same message there, which is the withdrawal deal is already done and dusted and they don't want to reopen it in order to have this renegotiation that Boris Johnson is suggesting. So potentially a frosty reception from EU leaders as they go to the G7 summit later this week, but perhaps a warmer one from Donald Trump. Boris Johnson also spoke to him last night, and the president tweeted overnight that they had a great conversation and he thinks that they could could move forward rapidly towards a US-UK trade deal. The only thing that might scupper that is, of course, the backstop, because we've now also heard from senior Democrats, including their leader in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, who says that if the Good Friday Agreement is put in jeopardy, if there is a hard border in Northern Ireland, then US politicians will block any trade deal from going ahead.